3.5 years ago, I moved to L'Arche and Lethbridge. This is my second community here in Toronto. And I moved with my partner, Sam. And so, of course, I was nervous too, like Pat, about what to expect, given that I was moving into a house with 7 other people. And I realize now, though, that my choice to go to community was safer than a lot of people's choices, and this is for a couple of different reasons. For one thing, I came with Sam, and if I didn't like being in the community, at least I had Sam with me, and so that was one thing. And the other thing was I think that at that point, I was still of the impression that I didn't necessarily need a community. I went because I'd proven that I could take care of myself through my university, and that I sort of figured, I guess, I could move into a house where I could help other people who needed care and weren't necessarily able to do all of the tasks for all of the things that it takes to take care of a home and yourself by themselves. So I thought I had something to give. But I was also aware of the fear that I had in relation to people that were different from me. And I desired for that fear to be dissipated. And I wanted to learn how to be friends with people that weren't necessarily just like me. So in a sense, when I arrived in community, I didn't come because I thought I needed it, but because I thought I could help. So I mean, it's not a bad reason. It's the first reason, I guess. It got me there. And many of our assistants, they come from different. I think most people come to our community come alone, and it's a huge risk for people. I think most of our assistants come from different countries, and over the last 3 years, I've lived with people from France, Germany, Serbia, South Korea, Romania, England, and the Philippines. So it's also been kind of a cultural experience. And often they come alone, and they come to a different culture, and they find themselves in the midst of large culture with many different people. When my friend Doug arrived, Doug is a core member in L'Arche Lethbridge. When he arrived in the community, he was dropped off by some workers from the institution, the big institution in Alberta that was in Red Deer. And he came with one laundry bag full of clothes that didn't fit him properly, and a small Bible that had been given to him on the day that he left the institution by a small group that served at the institution. So Doug needed community, and so he chose it. And on one level, I could resist choosing community because at least I was with Sam, and if the community turned out to be something that wasn't for me, then I was still felt kind of safe. And looking back on my state of mind, I can see how I was wrapped up in my own individuality. What I didn't realize was that this sense of individuality that was mine, that was the source of much of my inner pain as well. So after 4 years of studying at university and graduating with a degree, I had really no clear direction, and I felt a little bit lost. I kind of struggled through university, and I was interested in what I was studying, but I think I dealt with a certain lack of meaning in my life in those days. And there was a loneliness that I frequently felt, and I didn't really know how to deal with it. Mostly it felt like I was missing something. And because of it, I felt like I was unlikely to really find happiness. As I got to know Doug, though, I began to recognize that things that gave him life, but also the things that caused him to suffer, were very similar to mine. That Doug also suffered from a loneliness that was difficult for him to bear. Having lived most of his life in an institution and having made the transition to community life, he had some longer-term friends in the community, but he still suffered as a result of the many people that came and left community. There's a lot of transition in our homes. And so he would connect to people, and then he would have to say goodbye to them very quickly. In Doug, I saw a deep longing for friendship and communion, but also a deep sadness and grief. And I saw a lot of the same things in myself. What Jean Vanier saw when he was visiting the institution prior to the beginning of L'Arche was the deep longing of the people with a disability for relationship. They were lonely in the institution, and there were almost no opportunities for people with a disability to contribute to their society or to relationships, or some to relationships that gave their life meaning. Most of the people that they had contact with were paid workers, and there were few friends in those days that came and visited the institution. And I think many of the people with a disability had been alienated from their families. And in some countries in the world, around the world, it's still a source of shame for a family to have a child with a disability. And in our culture, the eugenics movement continues to develop and raise new and difficult questions about the value of life, and sometimes without regard for the sacredness of life. Jean Vanier says that we become more human with two realities. One, as we discover that we are able to love and see the value of people seen as having no value. Second, as we discover that we too are broken, that we have our handicaps, and our handicaps are often about the feeling that value is just to have power. In L'Arche, we see that vulnerable people have a powerful message. By the way that they live their lives, we see through them that life is about relationship, not power, about celebration, and not busyness. So we need to ask ourselves, what was our society so afraid of that it institutionalized people with a disability? How is it that so much of our society was convinced that people with a disability were a burden? So I'm not saying that life in L'Arche is easy. we know it's not, right, Pat? It's filled with lots of hard stuff, but also with celebration and the suffering and the joy that we oscillate between in our life together is a result of the fact that we are people, not of one kind or another necessarily, but because we are living together in all of our diversity. Through relationship with Doug, I came to realize that my suffering was much the same as his. Our loneliness brought us to the same conclusion, the need for community in order to grow in our humanity. Our loneliness is like a sign. It tells us of our deep desire for communion with others. In his desire for communion and unity with others, I see Doug as a leader. He reveals to me what so many of our deepest desires are, to share with each other the joy that is part of life and that can only happen if we aren't cut off from also being in touch with the parts of our life that are hard. Vulnerability is at the heart of our community because it is what brings us together. It's through this vulnerability that we come to know and love one another and value and affirm life as being good. And I think that the invitation that we need to continue to extend that happens in L'Arche, much like Jean Vanier's initial compassionate action, is to continue to invite people to live with us and to continue to live with people so that we can create a more human society. And this is really the gospel. I guess the gospel of Doug is much like the spirit of the gospel that L'Arche was founded on. And with Doug, it was always that no matter how hard it got, to continue to welcome people into his life. There was continual invitation there. He never gave up. He always sang "O Canada" his hardest. And he always invited people to be more human. And so I think the way that we can challenge our society to become more human is to become more human ourselves, and in our actions as well. And I think people with a disability also have a lot to teach us about how to create a good world, because their priorities are straight about the value of life being in relationship.